Hey, and welcome back to another video. Today I thought it would be fun to talk through what is the first game I got for every PlayStation console that I own. So it's kind of interesting to think when you get around to buying a console, right? Whether that's at launch or after the fact, there's usually something that sort of sparked your interest, right? Or like at some point a game came out where you were like, I can't afford not to play this. And so this is going to be an interesting blend of a couple of those different things, right? We have some systems in here that I got on launch, although not as many as you might think. We have systems that I got, as gifts. We got all manner of systems, We've acquired systems in a number of different ways. So I figure I'll take you through every Sony system and handheld that I own and talk about what was the first game or games that I got for that system, why, how did I get it, etc. Just a good way to, revisit some launch memories, go back in time, and just talk about some memories that maybe I've never talked about on the channel before, or maybe have come up and I just want to give a little more context to. If you're into this, or if this is a fun idea, please let me know. You can either like the video or leave a comment, because I'd be more than happy to do the same type of video for my other systems, maybe my Nintendo consoles, Nintendo handhelds, Xbox, stuff like that. So let's go ahead and kick it off then with where it all began, Sony's launch system, the very first one, PlayStation 1, and my first ever game was Resident Evil 2. And thankfully I still have my original copies of all these games. You can see it's well loved. We've got a crack in the case there. We've got a nice meaty chunk out of the bottom down there. This was the first one I ever played. So I don't remember the exact year I got this. It was probably somewhere around like 5th or 6th grade. I remember being on the playground in 5th grade talking to a friend of mine. And he had the original Resident Evil. And he was telling me all about it. And I had like no real context for what it's a game, but it's designed to be scary. You're fighting zombies. And at the time, zombies were not what they are today. I mean, there's plenty of zombie movies, but zombies, hadn't hit their crazy zeitgeist like they did in the mid 2000s or 2010s. It was just like the entire idea of playing a game that is like isolating and atmospheric. It was totally fresh, totally new to me. I only had a Nintendo 64 at that point. I grew up a Sega kid and then a Nintendo 64 kid. So this was a step above what I was familiar with. And again, he was talking about the first game. So for my birthday, I believe, I told my parents I really want a PlayStation 1. And there were other games that I wanted on the PlayStation 1 too. It wasn't just Resident Evil. But they said, okay, we'll get it for you. My dad drove me down to the Best Buy. And he did that thing that we all love to hear as kids, where he said, you know what, we'll get you the system. He grabbed the PS1 box and he said, pick out a game. And so I walked up and down the shelves, pulling them all out, looking at them. And ultimately the game I landed on was Resident Evil 2. I brought this one home, popped it in, played as Claire the first time. Claire is always going to be my preferred pick in this game. I just think her survival story is a little more like, I know Rookie Cop is interesting, but random person off the street, it's more horror to me. But anyways, popped this in, loved it. I went on to buy all of the Resident Evils on the PlayStation, loved them all. This is definitely what got me into survival horror. You could say maybe stuff like the Shadow Temple in Ocarina of Time certainly helped, but yeah, I was really pumped when I picked this one up. Very first PS1 game, and I think a really good one to start with, right? When I think of PS1, I think of this game. And I don't think that's just because it was my first game. I think it's a lot of you would probably agree. It's emblematic. Funny enough, I could have gotten it on the Nintendo 64, I guess. It did have a port, but it felt like a PlayStation game to me. So now we're going to move on to the PlayStation 2. And we're going back to probably holiday of 2001, maybe Christmas of 2002. Not 100% sure. We're going back to Christmas Day. So, actually, no, Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve. So, I opened my presents under the tree. Christmas Eve, we'll say 2002. And what's inside? No, it's 2001 because I was in 6th grade, I think. Yeah, doesn't matter to the story. Anyways, I open my presents under the Christmas tree, and what do I find? A PlayStation 2. And by this point, I was a big RPG fan. You know, I had the PlayStation 1. Final Fantasy 7 really got me into RPGs, gave me that first step, and then going back in that era, playing through old Super Nintendo RPGs at the same time that I was playing through all the current PS1 RPGs, just exploded my love of the genre. I was so into them. And so when I got my PS2, there was only one game that I knew I needed to have right out the gate, and it was, of course, Final Fantasy X. This was a phenomenal entry. I still defend Final Fantasy X to this day. I know a lot of people think of Final Fantasy X as the beginning of the end for the franchise. I'm not one of those people. I think this is a very special game. It was such a step up from the PS1 games. To go even from Final Fantasy IX, which is a gorgeous game, to go from that to Final Fantasy X is a huge leap. So much so that I remember on Christmas Eve, I unwrapped everything. We went down to my room, hooked up the PlayStation 2, and I started it up. And the first cutscene is playing, we're in Xanarkand, Sin is attacking, Auron is there. I remember my dad standing over my shoulder while I lay on my bed playing this game on my 20-inch CRT TV. And he looked at it and he said, it's like real life. He's like, how are they ever going to make graphics better than that? He didn't say graphics. He didn't understand even the word graphics, but he's like, that's so real. And I was like, yeah, man, I don't know how they even made him look this good. It's never going to get better than this. And now look where we are, right? But this was a huge moment for me in terms of like, wow, games have real potential in terms of where they can go visually. But then I, of course, loved the game. I actually demolished this game. I ended up playing through the entire thing in 3 days. It was holiday break. I just got a brand new PS2. It's holiday break. I got nothing else going on. Yeah, I'm going to churn through Final Fantasy X. So I absolutely scarfed this. Did not chew my food. But I love this game. It is still one of my favorite Final Fantasies and a perfect introduction to that system. All right, PS3. I was a latecomer to PS3. I think a lot of people were. In this generation, I got the 360 and I got the Wii at launch. We'll tell those stories in a future video if you're interested. But the PS3 I did not get. A lot of people remember, if you go back, the early years of the PS3, it did not have a lot of hype. When it came out, it was considered a bit of a miss. Like, there was fun to be had for sure, but it wasn't until Uncharted and really Uncharted 2 started to turn around people's opinion on the system. It came out, it was too expensive for a lot of folks, and a lot of the big games didn't come out until the latter half of its life cycle. So I was one of those people. I did not get one right away, not until I believe 2008. And it was one of those situations where there was a game coming out that I absolutely needed to play, and I didn't have a PS3 at the time, so it was time to get one. Now, it was still too expensive for me at the time. Again, I believe there was $600 back in the day to get like that original fat PS3, and I don't know, I can't recall if there was a price drop at this point. I don't think there was. But a friend of mine had recently gotten a pretty good job, or what was a good job at the time. Like, he was making good money for us being, teenagers or whatever, and late or early 20s. And so he, for my birthday, helped me split the cost of a PS3. So he put in, I think, $300, and I put in $300. I was able to pick up the system. I got it with 2 games as far as I can remember. One, and the game that I needed to play, which had just come out pretty recently, was Metal Gear Solid 4. You saw I was a PS1 and PS2 kid. I had played all 3 of the other Metal Gear Solids. I loved them, and I needed to see where the story went. This is a weird game. I would actually like to replay this at some point, because this is one where I played this the one time when it came out, never revisited it. It is maybe the most Metal Gear that a Metal Gear game can be. 2 might be the most Metal Gear game, but it is certainly pretty freaking Metal Gear. So weird. I mean, look at this. On the back, it even says, I never even noticed that, in text right there. It's probably not going to focus, but it says produced by Hideo Kojima. Like, he had enough star power even back then to put his name in big bold letters on the back of the box next to the actual blurbs. But yeah, another game that, like, visually I was so impressed. It was so cool. It was a really good introduction to this system, to the PS3, and I loved that. The other game I got at the time, which I definitely had already played, because that same friend who helped me pay for it, shout out to Andy. Andy's a real one. He also got Resistance, and we played that together. He was really big into the online for Resistance, and I played it more for the single player, I think, but I was happy to have a new first-person shooter. You know, this is the era of Halo, and it's right on the cusp of Call of Duty, or it's right at the same time. So it's like, it was the premier first-party shooter, and I really enjoyed this game. I think it's pretty awesome. I never went on to play the second one or the third, but I always thought that this game was really cool, and it was a good one to have. This was like Metal Gear Solid was the I'm gonna play that for me. Resistance was that I'm gonna play that with my bros. And you know, social gaming at the time during that era was taking off, and so you needed a mix. Yeah, early PS3 games with the early PS3 spines. All right, that brings us to PS4, and PS4 is an interesting one. I actually don't really know why, but I was very late in the PlayStation 4 life cycle. Like, PlayStation 4 came out, if I recall, 2013. And I did not pick one up until 2015. I always meant to. I think it was just like a cost thing, you know? I think that maybe there weren't quite enough games to justify the expense at the time. I had, at that time, when the PlayStation 4 would have first come out, that would have been right around the time that I had purchased my first house. So it was probably like, you know, I wasn't making that great of money at the time. I needed to be able to afford the house and bills and stuff. It just wasn't a purchase I could justify. But in 2015, a game came out that I could not say no to. And this is a game that a lot of people think of as the best game on the PlayStation 4, I think. But Bloodborne. I was deep in Souls fever at this point. You know, I had played every Souls game to that point. Loved them all. Starting with Demon Souls all the way up through Dark Souls. Well, it would have been Dark Souls 2 at the time. I think Dark Souls 3 came out the same year as Bloodborne, right? Maybe after Bloodborne, later in the year. But yeah, I had played Dark Souls 1, 2, and Demon Souls. Loved those. And I was so pumped when Bloodborne came out. In fact, this was another one. Speaking of like community experiences, my friends and I, when this game came out, we all hopped into a PlayStation party, and pretty much the whole game we spent like not co-op but co-op gaming. We didn't do a lot of joining each other's games or anything, but it was just the shared experience of like, oh my god, you guys, I finally beat Father Gascoigne, or oh my god, the blood-starved beast, I've been dying to him for 2 hours. Just kind of like shared misery, swapping tips, you know, here's what weapon is good, here's the strategy I used on this boss, things like that. Just kind of the process of discovery together, which I really love. That's actually one of the things I like about streaming, is I like discovering things together with other people. You know, it's fun to swap information, share tips, and sort of improve and progress parallel to other people that you like. And that's why I also love whenever a game sort of has hidden mysteries, sort of like ARG. Not everyone understands exactly how to solve all the puzzles, where there's a community effort to solve those. I love stuff like that. And Souls games are good for that too, because there's often pretty obscure mysteries and things hidden in them. But yeah, Bloodborne's incredible. I really think that at some point they will give us a remaster of this. I don't think it's just going to be a port. I think that whether it's Blue Point or another studio, I do think we will get a full-on remake of Bloodborne. At this point, they would have given it to us already if they weren't, or if they didn't plan on doing a big remake. They would have already had a 60 FPS version, a remaster that they put out. So I say look forward to it. Or maybe by the time you're watching this video, maybe whatever that is already out and I've just dated myself, but I think it'll happen. And then now we get to PS5, the most modern of the consoles. I do have the handhelds that we'll talk about too. But PS5, I was so hyped. Basically, I would say that at this point, I just love a launch so much. I love a system launch, even though it looks like I don't, because all 4 of those I didn't get on launch. If you follow my history of like Xbox and Nintendo stuff, I really do get a lot of stuff on launch because I like that launch window hype. I like when everyone's excited about it. I love that first moment when you boot up a system and you get that fresh new UI that you've never seen before. I don't watch a lot of like pre-release footage or walkthroughs or anything. I want it to be a fresh experience. What's my dashboard going to look like? What's my game library going to look like? All that stuff. So I love a launch. When PS5 was coming out, I couldn't say no. And it had a pretty solid launch lineup. I pulled out 2 games here. I think there's actually one that I forgot to grab, but we'll talk about it. I got Demon's Souls and Miles Morales, the Ultimate Launch Edition, which includes Spider-Man Remastered, which I'd never played. I forgot to grab Sackboy too, which was a great, like a good 3D platformer. I wasn't a huge Little Big Planet fan, but I really liked Sackboy, so I want to give it its due and shout it out. But I would say that of these, the one I was really excited for and the one I played right away a lot was Demon's Souls. I had context. I had Demon's Souls on PS3, so it was already a game that I really loved. And this was like a true showpiece in all senses for what the PlayStation 5 was capable of. Not only was it visually gorgeous, emitters up the wazoo, everything ran so smooth, it looked so nice, it was so crisp, all the effects were gorgeous. I know a lot of people had issues with like them adding more color and contrast to the game, but I think it still maintained the spirit of Demon's Souls, and it ultimately did a really good job showing like, here's what the PS5 is going to look like. And then we can't ignore those load times, right? Being able to hop into a level and it taking like a few seconds to get in versus going back and revisiting the PS3 version and it taking so long to boot up a level. This is like, it actually felt next gen. Now, not every game that came out on the PS5 after that felt next gen, but this one really did truly feel next gen. And yeah, I gobbled this up. I was so pumped. I was sitting at the windowsill, just staring out the window, waiting for my PS5 to come in the mail. I was like, why aren't you here? I was following the tracking. I saw it was out for delivery, and I was just staring out the window like a kid on Christmas, man. Couldn't wait. And then I also grabbed Miles Morales, which I didn't play right away, but I did play, I think a little bit late, maybe a month later or so. Loved that. I wanted to play through Spider-Man Remastered first. Oh, it was Spider-Man Remastered as I played a month later. Then I actually played the Miles Morales a ways after that, but that was a really good experience too, playing the remastered version as my first version of Spider-Man, so I got kind of the best case scenario, right? I got all the bells and whistles on this game that a lot of people loved, that I had previously missed because I usually don't get super into superhero games. But yeah, PS5 was one of the all-time best launches, if you include, which you should, Astrobot, or Astro's Playroom. Man, legendary. It's right up there with Super Mario 64 in terms of like incredible launch games. All right, let's go back in time a little bit, and let's do the handhelds. So we've got the PSP and the Vita. We'll start with the PSP. Ooh, oh, you just got a little spoiler back there. I don't actually remember the exact launch circumstances of my PSP. I remember that it was a very hype system at the time. I started with the DS, but the fact that the PSP had multimedia capabilities, the fact that you could download and put music videos on your PSP was like, it was so cool at the time. This is in an era where iPod video was like a fresh new technology. So this big, beautiful screen that I could run movies and music videos and TV shows off of, and just throw onto like a thumbstick or onto an SD card and play. Oh my god, it was so cool. But I remember that in the very early days of my PSP, 3 of the games that I picked up were Loco Roco, Lumines, and I think Wipeout Pulse, which might have come with my PSP. I'm not sure. But these 2 for sure. Lumines and Loco Roco. I remember a friend of mine played Lumines all the time. He was really good at it. And I was so into the music, I was so entranced by it that when I got my PSP, I was like, I have to get Lumines. And this is like the perfect game to have on launch because you can pick it up, you can play for a few hours, you can set it down and play something that's a little more story driven, and you can come back to it. It's like you always have something to return to. There's always some opportunity for fun, basically. And Loco Roco, this, and then a little later Patapon, were the 2 games that I really loved about the PSP early days. It felt like, here's something fun, here's something playful, something cute. If you've never played Loco Roco, you control these little like jelly guys, and you roll around in the levels, trying to squeeze them into areas. You split them apart into a bunch of little guys or combine them into big ones. It's all kind of like a momentum puzzle platformer. But early on, it felt different to anything that Nintendo was doing at the time. Like, this felt decidedly Sony, you know? It was very... It's hard to describe, but Nintendo has its own very polished, very fun feel, and Sony has their own separate feel, where their games just feel a little more out there, I guess. Like, this was an era of experimentation for them, which I really loved. Just trying stuff and seeing what stuck. So, Loco Roco is kind of one of my early favorite PSP games. Got that early high school, played it a ton. But really, my PSP launch experience was mostly about that multimedia. I used to bring my PSP to my German class in high school and sit there and watch music videos for like Funeral for a Friend and stuff in class. It was awesome. And then finally, the Vita, another system I did not get right away. This was 2012, and I just not in a position to pick it up right when it came out, but I always planned on getting one because I loved the PSP so much, and the Vita had that gorgeous screen. It was so nice. I actually ended up getting one pre-owned, I think. I think my first Vita ever was a pre-owned one that I bought from GameStop. And it's because there had a game that had come out a few months ago that I knew I needed to play. A banger Vita game, and that's Gravity Rush. When this came out, I instantly knew, like, this is a system seller for me, and I couldn't get it right away, but it was so close. So eventually I went into GameStop, picked up a Vita. I don't remember, I want to say that I made sure I got the OLED screen, but I don't actually remember for sure if the non-OLED version of the Vita had been released yet. But either way, I made sure that I got that beautiful OLED screen with the super deep blacks. And I picked up Gravity Rush and a few other games and played through this one in like 3 days. I was so into it. I would go to my buddy's house and I would sit in a recliner, and then I would like be able to like swivel around and pivot so I could do the gyroscopic aiming and the gyroscopic movement and play through the game that way, which was kind of the perfect way to play Gravity Rush. I highly recommend playing on a swivel chair, like a bar stool or something, if you ever pick this one up. But yeah, as soon as I popped this in, I was like, I could not believe how good of a job Sony had done with the Vita. It was like, in terms of hardware, it was the perfect successor to the PSP in so many ways. I don't know why Sony decided to kill it out of the gate. Even by the time I got a Vita, or like 2013, they were already like trying to forget about it. So it's a system that definitely deserved better. Vita deserves a lot more love. But yeah, Gravity Rush was my first game that I picked up for it a few months after it came out, and I couldn't have been happier. Still one of my favorite Vita games ever. So good. And yeah, I think that's it. That is everything. You know, we got a bunch of launch games there, and then we got a bunch of launch games there. That's the first game I owned for every PlayStation system. I guess I didn't do PlayStation VR. Maybe I can do that in another video if folks are really into that. But that is my PlayStation launch library. The games that inspired me to get each one of the systems. Like I mentioned, please let me know if you're interested in other systems, like you want a Nintendo one or something like that, because these are fun for me to do. I like to travel back in time. I have a lot of fond memories around launches and stuff for other systems, so I'd be happy to do it for any other of the big three major publishers you want to see. And beyond that, as always, appreciate you hanging out. Leave a comment. Let me know what your first games were for each system, because that's fun to talk about, right? Everyone has their own genres, their own types of games that inspire them into getting a console where it's like, I have to do this. So I'd be really curious to know about it. As always, you can leave a like as well. Anyways, until next time, peace.